No?
That's not a problem.
No class
Is this
for
yours?
the last,
No, or the microphone.
Last what?
since a week ago Tuesday.
No, you were away.
No, but there was no class.
You were
last
away.
night. I came back.
Why?
Just for class.
You really worried? They're doing very good, Baruch Hashem.
You have a number now.
Huh?
You have a number.
They doing well, Baruch Hashem. What else do you want to hear about? Let me give you the short, quick rundown before I'm going to be bombarded with questions. So welcome everybody, welcome back. It was great. And what was the trip? And Wednesday and Thursday I was busy. I was teaching a class for rabbis on the campuses of Israel, not communities, not cities, not neighborhoods, particularly rabbis on campus. Every campus today in Israel has a Chabad rabbi. And they are learning also to officiate weddings, and that was my part in giving classes to them. And we met with some other rabbis. I know there was a picture going around. Mrs. Farkash is very, put a picture out of the fancy rabbi was me. Oh, the other fancy rabbi? The other fancy rabbi was the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. His name is Rabbi Yosef. His father used to be the chief rabbi of Israel about 20 or more years ago. Rabbi Yosef. This is his son. He's not the successor of his father. Between him and his father, there were two other chief rabbis. In Israel now, legally, a chief rabbi can only serve a chief rabbi of Israel can only serve a term of 10 years. And then after 10 years, he has to give it over to someone else.
And Randall, when was leader?
Who?
Randall, the one that we saw.
Rabbi Lau.
Lau,
Rabbi Lau also. Rabbi Lau was actually the chief rabbi together with Rabbi Ovadia Yosef or together with Rabbi Mordechai. I think he was together with Rabbi Ovadia. Could be, I don't remember. But anyway, so he's now the chief rabbi of Israel. His name is Rabbi Yosef. So he was across the street of where I gave the classes. Mm-hmm. So we made a special invitation before I came. The organizers, that lunchtime we're going to go across the street to go hear a class from this rabbi. Because after all, he's the one who's going to sign their certificates. So I'm only teaching. But so I was there Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday night I also happened to be at a wedding, so I went to a wedding in Tel Aviv. It was the chuppah. Thursday night I went to Mayanot Yeshiva to meet Moses Merakov. You know Moses, the tall guy? We had a very good time. He is doing good in the yeshiva. And then I spent time with my parents on Saturday night. Shabbos ended in Jerusalem 8:30.
So early?
8:30. And I had a flight at 11:30 until you finish Ma'ariv and the Levana blessing and Avdallah and my mother saying goodbye. It also takes a long time. So I'm very happy I made it to the airport to the plane. It was only 3 hours after Shabbos that my plane left. It's an hour to Ben Gurion, and then there's lines there, but Baruch Hashem. Akol haya beseder. I came to New York early Sunday morning, and I drove up to the Catskills to see Elimelech and Yisrael. They are both. Sure, you're not here. That's what you mean. You don't know the news. Elimelech and Yisrael are both in Gan Yisrael, New York, in the Catskills. So I went to see them, spent some time with them. It was visiting day in camp. Do you have a grandchild here? No. In New York?
No.
This year? No.
Montreal.
By Montreal. Didn't you have 1 year in Gan Yisrael?
Yeah, 2-3 years.
Right. So I went visiting day, bought him candy and more candy. And then I had to go back to Newark Airport to make my way home. Baruch Hashem, I made it home. And Monday morning I was here in Shul. Let's see who was here. Rabbi Chaim was here. Okay. And now you're all here. So now you know everything what happened on the trip. There's nothing more I can add. So and my parents are doing well. And any other question before we go to class?
And when did you sleep?
What happened in the Catskills remains in the Catskills.
No, I don't know. Not sure which Catskills you're talking about. What else happened? That's it. Baruch Hashem to be back. Now we are here. Was very happy to see the beautiful weather over here.
It's hot over there, wasn't it? Was it hot there?
Very hot in Israel.
Oh, goodness.
I went to the Kotel Friday to the wall. It was like I had to go inside, under the tunnel there because it was so hot to stand at where I usually stand. It was very hot. Now this week is even hotter. They say today, Wednesday, it was the hottest day since 1948. Since 1948, when Israel was declared as a modern day country, never did they have a hot day like today. This is the hottest day in the history of the state of Israel since it became a state, that they have recorded. You saw it in the news? The hottest day since 1948.
They say that the last time it was hotter was in 1932, which was 54 degrees Celsius. Wow. That's what it said in the...
Right. So, I don't know, I didn't read that part, but I know that this was the hottest day today.
Yeah.
And with Baruch Hashem, people have air conditions. It's not like, but a lot of people don't have air conditions. So, I hope they actually closed down all the parks today. They made sure that nobody is going out and keep themselves safe. But here we are, Baruch Hashem, the weather looks like I always say, this weather reminds me that we're almost about to light Hanukkah candles.
But it's so much easier to breathe. I love this weather.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.
Okay, Parsha. Any other question before we go? Everybody's doing well? Baruch Hashem, you're here? Good. This week is Parsha's Balak, 856. The Parsha of Balak is a very beautiful Parsha, and it's a very fundamental Parsha. A Parsha which deals with the fundamentals of Jewish faith, mainly the coming of Mashiach. The story of Balak is a very important story. The Jews are just conquering city after city, swiping their way through the desert, almost about to make it into Israel. And there's a small country called Moab. And Moab decides that they are going to get into war with those Jews on their way to the land. We are almost there. And Moab was not easy to fight with. But at the same time, Moab knew that just fighting conventionally is not going to work. Because they already saw the news from the day before, the day before yesterday, that many of those who tried to fight the Jews lost their battles. And we are almost there. So Moab decided to fight us, which we call in English, unconventional. What is unconventional? So today you have unconventional weapons, right? Which is usually referring to what? What's an unconventional weapon? Nuclear. And the whole world is dealing with how to get rid of this unconventional weapon called nuclear. But there was no nuclear weapon, at least as a weapon, a craft that the Torah recognizes and tells us we shouldn't even let them to remain alive. It's an idea which exists. It's called kishuf in biblical terminology, right? Witchcraft. Today everything is like, don't believe in it, it doesn't work. It could be. There's some opinion which say that this is already cancelled, it's nullified. There are some places in the world which still witchcraft is a very strong phenomenon. In Brazil, in India, in Tibet, there is such a in Haiti, dominate your Midian. Matter of fact, Midian is recognized to us from whom? Who was a Midianite? Jethro. According to some Midrashic sources, Bilam was I believe, a grandson, or no, Israel. Here, just give me 1 second. I think either a grandson or
A descendant.
no.
No, yes.
The Zohar says.
Closer than
The Zohar says that. Sorry, you're talking about Balak. The Zohar says that Balak was a grandson, the son of Yitro. Basically, a grandson of Yitro, which was basically a nephew to Moshe.
related to what?
That's called a nephew in Hebrew,
And that's the law to
right?
Moses.
It means that Moshe's mother, Moshe's wife, was an aunt to Yisro somehow. I'm sorry, to Balak. But either way, this Balak guy goes and he's hired. It wasn't, what do you call a man of a witch? What do you call it? A witchcrafter?
Sorcerer.
Huh?
Sorcerer.
Sorcerer. Oh, yeah. He wasn't just a sorcerer, or what's the other word? Is it a different word?
Sorcerer.
A sorcerer, that's usually translated. He wasn't just a sorcerer. He was a prophet. He was a prophet. To the point that the Medrash makes a comment when it says in the Chumash that no prophet in Israel was ever to be considered like Moses. No other prophet that says, V'lo kom navi b'Yisrael k'Moshe. No one was like Moshe. You know what the Medrash says? Unbelievable Medrash. The Medrash says that in Israel, among the Jews, there was none similar to Moses. Moses is the highest and greatest prophet. There were other prophets, but no other prophet is as great as Moses. Says the Medrash, that's only among the Jews. But among the Gentiles, there was a prophet just like Moses, and this is Bilam. So Bilam is considered to be, in value of prophecy, just as great as Moses himself. As Moses himself. Commentaries discuss it. What does it mean that he was as great as Moses? One insight I saw, a beautiful insight by a rabbi in Jerusalem, lived 150 years ago, Rabbi Leib Diskin. He says something very good, something very special. He says that what was the difference between every prophet and Moses among the Jews, the Jewish prophets? So Maimonides says one of the differences, the main difference was the way they experienced their prophecy. The prophecy of any other prophet was like seeing the sun through a colored glass. Moses was like seeing the sun through a clear glass. The sun, what does it mean face to face? When the sun shines through a clear glass, it's the very same sun outside is being reflected inside. But when it's a colored glass, then you see a colorful sun, a different color than its original shape, that's an original color. Moses saw the original. Bilam also saw the original. Every other prophet had to see God through layers and layers which concealed and at the same time were so-called deluding in a sense the great essential revelation of which they were supposed to experience. It was filtered, not by Moses, and at the same time not by Bilam. And Rabbi Diskin, the rabbi, in his commentary explains that there was a reason, because Bilam, if God would have to make himself acceptable according to Bilam's containing abilities, then what would end up being that godliness would have become also so-called filth, would have become dirty in a sense by interfering and integrating into Bilam. It would have rather stayed in its essential purity, so Bilam and Bilam's abilities does not affect the purity of godliness. But either way, Bilam is a great prophet. And through Bilam, we achieved one of the greatest prophecies which we read in this week's Parsha, and the way the Rambam, Maimonides, in his book of Mishnah Torah, discusses and he explains this prophecy. The Rambam says the famous words that anyone who does not believe in the coming of Mashiach or does not wait for his coming denies not only statements of other prophets, because in the book of prophets, in the books of Nevi'im, you have a lot of statements about a future Mashiach. Says the Rambam, but those people who don't believe or wait for Mashiach, they actually deny the Torah and they deny Moses, our teacher. Because the Torah testifies to the coming of Mashiach. And the Rambam brings a list of verses where the idea of Mashiach is mentioned in the Torah or alluded in the Torah. And one of the major sources in the Torah for this concept called Mashiach, says the Rambam, is Parsha's Bilam Nemar. This is specifically mentioned in the Parsha of Torah, which talks about Bilam. And in this Parsha, says the Rambam, Bilam Niba Beshnei HaMeshichim. Bilam prophesies the coming of two anointed kings. The first anointed king, Shehu David, is David. You know who he is? Yeah?
I've heard of
King David, who saved Israel from her oppressors. And the second and the final anointed king will be Moshiach, which, as the Rambam says, Omed Bibanav, will arise from the descendants of the first anointed king of David. And he is going to be Moshiach, as the Rambam said, that he, Moshiach, is Israel B'achroino, he will save Israel in its final days. King David is called the Moshiach. The word Moshiach means Mashuach. Mashuach means anointed. As in the story in the Tanakh, in the book of Samuel, when David was appointed as a king, he was anointed with a horn, right? A horn like from what was filled with oil, and it was poured of him, and that's how he became anointed. Where do we see David HaMelech, and where do we see Moshiach being prophesied by Bilam? So for this, you're going to open your Chumash, and you're going to see the way the Rambam learns this week's Parsha. Open chapter 24, just verse 17 and verse 18, which you can find in your Chumashim on page 872. So verse 14. This is, by the way, I'm not sharing this story because you all know this story, that Bilam is tempting to curse once, twice, three times. He keeps on moving positions, always trying to figure out the curse, which is the unconventional war, is trying to wage against Israel, and it doesn't work. Words of blessing keeps on emerging from his mouth. And when it comes to verse 14, we're only going to read those three verses. Says the verse as follows: Ve'ato ineni oilech le'ami. It says, and now, behold, I go to my people. L'choi yotzcho, asher yoseom hazeh le'amcho b'achis hayomin. Come, I shall advise you what these people will do to your people in the end of days. Basically, he's coming and he tells his people, the nations of the world, let me tell you what's going to happen to us, to you, by those people, by the Israelites. And here he begins his parable, and he talks, and he introduces himself as Bilam, and he talks about the one who knows God, who sees God, and then comes verse 17. Verse 17 begins as follows. Er'enu veloy ato. I see him, but not now. Ashurenu veloy koroiv. I perceive him, but not in the near future. What is it saying? It says the Rambam. The words I have seen him, but not now, refers to King David. I perceive him, but not in the near future, is referring to Melech HaMashiach, to the Messianic King. Meaning that these two phrases refer to the very existence of David and Mashiach. Continuing the next verse, in the same verse, the next paragraph, Dorach koichov miyakov. I see, it says, a star shall go forward from Jacob. Vekom shevet mi Yisrael, and a staff shall arise in Israel. Says the Rambam, Dorach koichov miyakov, a star shall go forward from Jacob. Zeh David. This refers to David. This is David HaMelech. Vekom shevet mi Yisrael, and a staff shall arise from Israel. Zeh Melech HaMashiach. What is the connection of a star and a staff? Why is a star referring to a King David, and why does the staff refer to Melech HaMashiach? Anybody has any insight? Usually in Tanakh also we find star is referring to something which leads you to a direction. You follow the stars. It's a parable for something which shows a direction. And this is the idea of a king. Similarly, shevet, a staff, usually a staff is in the reference or in the contents of a sheep, of somebody who grazes sheep, who leads sheep. So he's holding like a staff which ensures the proper path for the sheep to follow him. This is Kochav, and this is Shevet. And this is the activities of David HaMelech and Mashiach in guiding the people to more complete performance of either the observance of Torah, the connection to God, which is basically the job of King David was, and this is going to be ultimately the purpose of Melech HaMashiach, of King Mashiach. Says the verse again. What else does Bilam say? Umochatz pasei moyov. I see him crushing all the Moab's princes. Who is this referring to? Says the Rambam, this refers to David HaMelech. Because we have a story in the book of Samuel where it says regarding David HaMelech, Vayaches Moab, that David HaMelech smote, he crushed Moab. David HaMelech did it. And then when it says, Vekarkar kol bnei sheis, dominating all the descendants of Seth. Who is going to be dominating all the descendants of Seth? Says the Rambam, the Melech HaMashiach, this refers to the King Mashiach, which regarding King Mashiach, it says in the book of Zechariah, Umoshlei miyom ad yom, that he will rule from sea to sea. David and Mashiach basically were both fighting the war of God And not only fighting, David HaMelech was victorious with his war against Moab, and same thing, Melech HaMashiach is going to be victorious in making sure that the whole world recognizes the ruler and the one king as King of God. And then he continues verse 18. Ve'oyo Edom Yeroisha. Edom will be demolished. Who is going to demolish Edom, says the Rambam? The David. This is referring to David HaMelech, as it says in the book of Samuel, Vatei Edom le David la'avodim, that Edom became a servant to David. So this prophecy was already materialized by King David. Ve'oyo Yereisha, and they will be what? Ve'oyo Yereisha. What's the word here? Ve'oyo Yereisha seir oivav, ve'Yisrael oisachayil, and they will, what do you call Yerusha? They will inherit, right? Seir, and this refers, says the Rambam, is that's going to be to by Mashiach. Like we know the famous verse that we say actually every morning by davening in the end of the Song of the Sea. We read by the Shira, we read a verse from the book of Ovadia. Ve'olu moishim behar Tzion lishpot et ar Esav ve'hoisol Hashem amlucha. That the Savior is going to come up to the Mount Zion to judge and to destroy and to punish the descendants of Esau, and royalty will be to God. Comes the Rambam, based on the Medrash, based on our sources, and tells us this week's Parsha. That the story of the Parsha is that everything that you can imagine, and what we know, what we speak, what we read in the book of prophets and in the book of Talmud, in our holy belief in the coming of Mashiach, was actually introduced now by this mystical Gentile prophet with the name of Bilam. And my dear friends, I think it is important to stop for a moment and think about this idea of Mashiach. There's a famous saying that greatness is that you can share and talk about something which no one sees. Right? You're a great person, you can see what nobody else sees. But the truth is, it's even greater to see and to recognize that which everybody else sees, but they don't recognize as seeing it. And what I mean to say is that whatever we hear and read, all the stories about Mashiach, we are now in a time of history which is truly alluding to this idea. Meaning that everything that we know about Mashiach, if we only open our eyes, as the Rabbi used to say, we can see and sense and feel that this is the time. Mashiach is not here yet, but definitely is making his way here. And I will share a few ideas on this concept. First of all, we know from our Midrashic sources that before Mashiach is ruling as Mashiach, he is already demonstrating certain activities which is fitting to Mashiach. As the famous Medrash says, that B'shor Melech HaMashiach Nigla, the time when Mashiach is going to be revealing himself, he's going to be standing on the roof of the Beis HaMikdash, and he's going to say, hey, the time of your redemption has arrived. And if you don't believe, Mashiach is going to say, if you don't believe, this is already when the temple is built. And he's still talking, needing to convince. If you don't believe, he says, see that my light is already shining upon you. Which means to say that there is such a concept that Mashiach has certain activities, certain programs, so to speak, what belongs to the Messianic era, is already activated before Mashiach is fully recognized as the King Mashiach. This is called Simonei HaGehula, the signs of redemption. But in order to recognize them, we first need to know what is going the redemption to look like. So then we can know, are we actually tasting something of the Geula, or we're not tasting something of the Geula. For some people, it is very simple. For some people, for them it's like they see it. Maybe it doesn't completely affect their lives, but they don't need any proofs. If you take a Jew who was born in Europe, or a Jew which was even under the dark communist Russia when you weren't allowed to practice any davening or learning. And he, this Jew, 40, 50 years ago, knew that for him to put on tefillin meant to go down to a cell and to wrap himself tefillin, put on the shades over the windows, and make sure that nobody sees them, because if he sees them, he's going to be sentenced to exile. If you told the same Jew 50 years earlier that you know that we're going to be standing at the Red Square and asking Jewish people, like we stand in Tel Aviv at the central bus station, are you Jewish? Can you come put on tefillin? What would a Jew tell you 50 years ago? I don't know. This is like you're talking Maris. This is not happening. Because they lived in a time that they couldn't even believe, they couldn't even entertain in their mind there is such a possibility. I read a lot. Anytime a book goes out of a chassid's life back in Russia, I like to read those books. Even a lot of the stories are almost repetitive stories, meaning they shared similar experiences. I like to read now, as I came back at that wedding that I went when I came back from Israel, I took with me a book on the plane from my house, my parents' house. The name of the book is called Moshe Vitebsker. Moshe of Vitebsk. Vitebsk is a city in Belarus. We know the Alter Rebbe was married in Vitebsk. His wife was from Vitebsk. This Moshe Vitebsker, I knew too. His last name was Vyshetsky. A great chassid, lived in Kfar Chabad. Before Kfar Chabad, he was in Chernovitz. Before Chernovitz, he was in Siberia for many years. And he's from Vitebsk, originally a sheikhet in Vitebsk. He has a beautiful family. He had 4 sons. I knew his sons. 2 sons had a shoe store in Crown Heights and Kingston Avenue. Reb Michal and Reb Shlomo, 2 brothers. They had a 3rd son, who I knew in Israel, Vyshetsky, a famous Chabad Mishpacha Vyshetsky. And he passed away. He was a big chassid, everybody knew that the Moshe Vyshetsky is a very special chassid. And they gave out a book of his history, a biography, a picture of him. I can show it to you if you want, if I remember to bring it to my house. A picture of him with his dashik, with his casket, just the way he looked. And his history, the way he was arrested, and his one child made the way out of Russia in 1948, with his Polish passports. He came, and until he arrived 5 seconds after the train left, so he was not only didn't make it out of Russia, but he was arrested, knowing that he was going to run out with a false passport. The old Maisa, like a typical Hasidic Maisa of rabbis and mashpim, which I grew up by. And when you read the stories of the times when they are in Russia, and what kind of difficulties they have in preserving anything, and you think to yourself, if you would have told them, Moshe, in Chernovitz, there's a shul, you can go to Shav, daven, no one's going to bother you. They wouldn't even think about it. Jews who were living in Hungary during the Holocaust, when the blood of a Jew was so cheap, no one even turned his face once to see when a Jew was shot to death. Worse than a dog. And tell him, the Prime Minister of Hungary is looking forward to meet with you. Chveis. There is universities in Hungary with many Israeli boys are learning. I mean, whatever it is, this is called time changed. Time changed. You know how many Jews are in Israel now? You know there's close to 7 million Jews in Israel? Close to 7 million Jews means that half of the Jewish population, almost half of the Jewish population, lives now in Israel. So 80 years ago, 100 years ago, when my great-great-great-grandfather came to Israel, 200 years ago, his name was Rabbi Uri Hardenstein. He came to Israel. There was nothing. A few Jews in Tveria, a few Jews in Tzfat. And if you would have told him, you know, that soon we're going to have 7 million Jews here, he'll tell you, sure, I believe it. Mashiach is going to come, we're going to have 7 million Jews. And God tell him, no, Mashiach didn't come yet. And we still have 7 million Jews living in Israel. And shuls and yeshivas and you know, there's a Jewish prison and Jewish ganovim and Jewish gangsters and Jewish prisoners and Jewish police and kosher, non-kosher. What are you talking about? The Rambam describes what is the world and how is the world going to look when Mashiach comes. And this is interesting. The Rambam, for him to describe the coming of Mashiach, is not like we talking about Mashiach. For us talking about Mashiach is because, like I said, we have 7 million Jews, so it's easier to believe that one day it's going to be 14 million. Right? When you see a world today which doesn't have so many wars, and every time a tyrant tries to get up and fight, the world community stands up against him, right? And people are trying to keep things calmly on whatever cost. So it's easy to believe there's going to be a time when there's not going to be any war. But to write it 800 years ago, in a time when the Rambam himself lived a life that he was running and escaping from community to community because of those crazy wars, the Rambam didn't settle for a day. The Rambam was born in Cordova, and then he had to escape to Morocco. In coming to Morocco, he had to run after it to Israel. And coming to Israel, the Crusades came. He ran away from the Muslims, and he was stuck with the Crusades and the Christians. And came to Egypt. All his life is running. And go sit down and write a book about a time when there is no war. You have to be such a strong believer. You want to talk to me about that time of no war? We are almost there. How many wars exist in the world? Was there any war in the news this morning? This news is all talking about how to prevent war. Is he doing it right? Is he doing it wrong? Should he be? Shouldn't have not? It's all politics. It's all baloney. But bottom line is that Baruch Hashem, there is very little war. Israel is in an ongoing war, but not in a war. Practically speaking. America is obviously in war, but it's not in a war. If there's the few countries which are in war, so the entire nations, all the United Nations are getting up together trying to prevent it.
Not even Cold War.
Not even a Cold War, exactly. You know that a few months ago, there was a Jewish soldier who was lost in the Lebanon war in the 80s. Was returned to burial from Syria. A soldier with the name of Zechariah Bammel was returned to Israel's soil to be buried. And you know who brought him? Everybody thinks it was an operation of Israelis. No. Exactly. It was the Russian soldiers who are fighting in Syria, by direct direction of Putin, were given the order to find him and bring him back. They brought a casket back to Israel, and then they flew to Moscow to get his shoes of that soldier. Schaya Bomu. It was in the papers, right? Russia. You know what Russia was for us on Yom Kippur War? 6-day war. They were the problem. The Arabs didn't have enough ammunition. It was the Russians who kept on causing us the problem. We had to go into a ceasefire. Huh?
Communist, not Russia. Communist.
That was Russia then, okay. And they tried to so the Rambam talks about not war, a plenty to the food, no famine. No famine? Are we worried about famine? Are we worried about famine in America? No. Most of the world is almost out of famine. All these different programs, there's almost no famine. They say that in a number of fields there's not going to be any famine in the world. There'll be other problems, but no famine. But the Rambam lived in a time that he was very concerned. The Rambam had to work very hard to support his family. Not that he wrote his book. Originally he had a brother who supported him. And then the brother drowned in the sea with all his business, and the Rambam had to become a physician, a doctor, to support himself and his family. And he writes that it was so difficult for him for the first year. It was like going crazy. And the same Rambam sits, and what does he write? Let me tell you how the world is going to look when Mashiach is going to come. And it says in the prophet of Isaiah, the wolf will dwell with the lamb. You know what it means? The leopard will lie down with the young goat. You know what it means? Says the Rambam. And this prophecy is telling us that Israel will dwell securely together with the wicked Gentiles who are likened to a wolf and to a leopard. Rambam 800 years ago was able to talk about Israel living together like, lying on the same. How did he even think about such a thing? How could he even write about such a thing? Yes, he was a great believer. But to be in the position that he was, when everybody is fighting everybody, and a Jew is being chased out of every place, he himself is the kid, right? He is the lamb, and is being threatened. In every place that he lives, that he tries to settle, is being threatened again. And him and his family have to keep on hiding and running from place to place with his father Maimon, with his mother and the whole mishpacha, and everybody else like him. So the Rambam, no, this is now. Very soon, we have a Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, there's a prophecy. The wolf and the leopard, the wolf and the lamb are going to be settling together. How's it going to happen? Look today. We have Gentile neighbors. We have Jewish communities all over the world. Israel is an independent country, being recognized in the United Nations. Yes, there is trouble because Mashiach is not here. But ultimately, Baruch Hashem, this is called the light of Mashiach shining as leading towards his revelation. You want to be blind and put your head in the sand and say, I don't see anything? Fajalasta. You could, that's your choice. But if somebody comes and he tries to open your eyes and he tells you, look, this is what the Rabbi did in the last years before he left us. He spoke very strongly that the way things develop now is all the signs that we are in the presence of the coming of Mashiach. The Rambam says, it's going to come the time when Mashiach is going to come. There's not going to be, this is the last halacha in the Rambam. This he finishes the 14-volume book. He finishes with these words. In that era, there will be neither famine No war. In which era? In the era of Mashiach. And I'm telling you, not me. The Rebbe told us, and Tzaddikim are telling us, that if you open your eyes now, you can see that we are very close to the time where there's no famine and no war. But you couldn't have seen it 50 years ago. You couldn't have seen it for sure 100 years ago. You know how much food there is in Israel? It's funny. I always listen to my mother's mises, she told me mises and mises. And she told me this story about that my grandfather, there was a time in Israel in the 50s or in the 60s, it was called Kufat Tzena. It was a difficult time that they only gave one egg for a family.
Rationing.
Rationing?
It's called rationing.
Which year was it?
1950s.
It was in the 50s. She was a kid, a child. Her father, my Zayda, brought an egg at home and prepared her an egg and she didn't eat it. She didn't eat it. And she said, she cannot forget how my Zayda couldn't believe. Like it's as if someone presents you with a treasure of gold and you say, I don't want it. Like, what do you mean you're not going to eat it? You know how much it took me to get you that egg? Even I remember, when I grew up as a child, Baruch Hashem, I personally, somebody just asked me this question, so we had this discussion in Israel. And I told them the honest truth. I never felt that I am missing anything. I thought my parents are very rich. Because I had everything. At least I thought I had everything. They kept on telling me that I have everything. And now when I'm looking back, and I realized that actually I was never given meat during the week. Meat was only on Shabbos. And I said, 1 second, I thought we had everything. So my parents were tricky. They convinced me that a tomato on the bread is actually a better delicacy than meat. So I thought that I'm a rich boy because look, I have tomato on my bread, and I have margarine on my bread, and I have bread on bread, and bread mixed in bread, and I felt very comfortable.
But it's healthier.
I was healthier. I really, not me, not my brothers, none of us grew up feeling that we miss anything. There are kids, which never even when they have, the parents kept on talking to them that what we don't have. Don't do it. It's not for us. This is not. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. Even in my own house, I never use the word we can't afford it. Not that I can afford everything, because but I never heard the word from my parents. I realized that they never said we can't afford. Instead, they convince you that you don't need it, or whatever. But we were able to afford everything, Baruch Hashem. But this was conviction. Today in Israel, literally, it's crazy. There's so much food. The markets are overflowing for so little money. They're garnished.
People are dying from so much food.
People are dying. Oh, so now the epidemic became the opposite. They're not dying from famine. We're dying from extra Coke, right? We're not dying from not having Coke. We're dying from drinking Coke. Okay, this is already a separate story. I'm not talking about, obviously, everything good comes with a package. So this is a separate class, not for tonight. There's also challenges, But what we see is what the Rambam says over here, no war. How many wars are there? David, you read the paper? How many wars are there? Yemen. Okay, if Baruch Hashem getroffen a place in the world.
Wars going on in
Where?
and parts of Africa.
No, another 3 wars. What else? Look at the big countries. Used to be, a guy got up there, a Napoleon, a Chveis, a Stalin. You know how many people were killed between World War I and World War II?
Millions.
Millions?
Between World War I and World War II.
Both wars together, probably 100 million people, no? 100 million people. How many years ago? Not too many years ago. David, that was World War I. Remember?
Pardon?
How was World War I?
Arnold never told me.
Not too many years ago. Not too many years ago. You know, a few years ago, to be 60 years old, I was already an old man. 70-year-old, very old man. 90-year-old. Today, 90-year-old people are driving cars, and no one is afraid to going out to the street knowing that there's a 90-year-old man driving a car there. It's almost like normal. And soon they're going to discover the gene which controls age, and they're going to stop aging altogether. Shem Shmeleinu.
Get ready for Mashiach.
I don't know what it is. I can only tell you that the Rambam says, in his days, when it was almost unbelievable, it was almost unassuming to talk about a time of no war and no famine, the Rambam says there's going to be a time that will be need of famine, no war, and he says good will be in abundance, and he says that all the pleasures, the delight will be as common as dust. Common dust. Everywhere you turn, there is dust. Says the Rambam, everywhere you're going to turn, you're going to find all the delights you want. What are you going to be doing then? So he says you're going to only be busy in learning and to know God. This Parsha of Bilam, the Parsha that we are reading this today, especially it's the Shabbos before we start the 3 weeks period known as the Bein HaMitzorim. This Shabbos is actually the 17th of Tammuz. On the Jewish calendar, the 17th of Tammuz marks the bridging of the walls of Jerusalem, which led to the destruction of the temple, and it's a fast day. Being that it's Shabbos, so we can't fast on Shabbos, we're not allowed to fast on Shabbos, so the fast day gets postponed to Sunday. So it's a little easier. It's pushed off. A pushed off fast day doesn't carry the same seriousness of the original day. People who are sick or pregnant, nursing, will not fast this year on Sunday because it's much easier. So this is the time when it arouses and brings up to our memories the temple, the time when we're all living ideally around a place where we all recognize each other and knew what life is all about. And this is all going to come back once we have Mashiach come. So we're reading the Parsha of Bilam, Parsha which prophesies about 2 anointed kings. One came and we saw his success and he led us to a good place. And now we are waiting for the final one to come. And this is partially depending on us. Our good deeds hasten the coming of Mashiach. Like I said before, this is not my word, it's the word of Tzaddikim, the word of our Rebbe. We are in the era of Mashiach. All the signs are leading to one direction. Mashiach is making his way here. The world is about to reach its completion and its final and ultimate purpose. Let's be a part of it. Let's make it happen. Let's make sure that all of us in this room are going to be there soon by the coming of Mashiach and see his revelation speedily in our days. Amen.
Amen.
Any questions? Any comments?